High in the rugged peaks of eastern Turkey, a shape emerges from the mud that shouldn't exist. It was dismissed as a trick of geology for decades now, a boat-shaped hill and nothing more. But in recent reports, the news has emerged again. New high-frequency radar scans have pierced the surface, unfolding something the skeptics never expected: symmetrical rooms, right-angled walls, and the chemical ghost of ancient timber. Is this just a mountain, or are we standing on the exact ancient Ark of Noah? Legend versus landscape. The historic place of the Durupinar site wasn't found by an archaeologist with a trowel. It was found by a pilot with a camera. Back in 1959, a Turkish Air Force captain named İlhan Durupinar was reviewing aerial survey photos when he spotted something that looked like a giant footprint in the mud of the Tendurek Mountains. It was roughly 500 feet long, pointed at both ends, and sat about 6,500 feet above sea level. It looked like a ship that had been turned into stone. The discovery hit the world like a lightning bolt. For a moment, everyone from Life magazine to local villagers thought the search was over. But early expeditions in the 60s were, frankly, a bit of a letdown. Scientists did some surface digging, looked at the rocks, and essentially shrugged. They called it a lusus naturae, a freak of nature. They argued that the walls were just layers of basalt being pushed up by a landslide, forming a symmetrical shape by sheer coincidence. By the late 90s, the academic world had largely walked away, leaving the site to the elements and the occasional curious traveler. However, the site didn't just disappear. While the skeptics moved on, the Earth itself was changing. Decades of erosion, seismic shifts, and the slow drying of the soil began to peel back the layers of the site. More importantly, the technology we used to look beneath the ground caught up to the mystery. We stopped relying on what we could see with our eyes and started using tools that could see through the mountain itself. What was once a debate about looking like a boat has shifted into a debate about built like a boat. The landscape of eastern Turkey is harsh, unpredictable, and deeply ancient. It's a place where the borders of countries and the borders of history seem to blur. For years, the Durupinar site sat as a silent witness to this landscape, waiting for a generation of researchers who weren't just looking for a story, but for hard, digital evidence. The question shifted from, is this the Ark, to what exactly is buried under 20 feet of hardened clay? As the sun sets over the peaks of Ararat, the shadows cast by the formation seem to grow longer, as if the Earth is finally ready to give up its secrets. But to see those secrets, it's best to start looking through it, seeing through stone. Now let's talk about the tech. In the past, archaeology was a destructive science. If you wanted to see what was inside a hill, you had to tear the hill apart. But today, we use ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, which acts like a massive, high-definition MRI for the crust of the Earth. In late 2024 and throughout 2025, an international team of researchers brought the most advanced GPR arrays ever seen to the Durupinar site. These aren't the handheld units you might see on a construction site. We are talking about multi-frequency, deep, penetrating sensors towed by ATVs that map the subsurface in 3 dimensions with millimeter precision. GPR works by sending pulses of high-frequency electromagnetic waves into the ground. When these waves hit an object or a change in the soil density, they bounce back. By measuring the time it takes for those pulses to return, computers can reconstruct a digital image of what lies beneath. In the case of this site, the radar had to punch through layers of hardened volcanic clay and basalt flow. Previous scans in the 90s were fuzzy at best, low-resolution snapshots that hinted at shapes but offered no proof. The recent data, however, is like switching from an old tube TV to a 4K monitor. The unexpected results came when the software began to filter out the noise of the surrounding natural strata. Usually, when you scan a natural hill, the radar returns a chaotic mess of rocks, roots, and uneven soil layers. It looks like a messy static on a screen. But as the pulsars reached a depth of about 8 to 20 feet beneath the Durupinar surface, the chaos suddenly stopped. The screens began to show something that shouldn't exist in a natural landslide. Straight lines, perfectly parallel structures, high-contrast reflections that indicate a material density completely different from the surrounding mountain stone. The researchers were stunned to find that these weren't just random echoes. The radar revealed a skeletal framework, a grid-like pattern that runs the entire length of the 515-foot formation. This isn't just about seeing a shape, it's about seeing the structural integrity of a massive object buried under thousands of tons of earth. The technology has effectively stripped away the skin of the mountain to reveal a skeleton that looks suspiciously like a masterpiece of ancient engineering. These tools have allowed us to bypass the skepticism of the naked eye, providing a data-driven look at a world buried by time. But as the digital map of the site became clearer, the researchers noticed something even more baffling than just straight lines: subsurface geometry. As the data from the new scans began to render on the research team's monitors, the atmosphere in the mobile lab shifted from professional curiosity to stunned silence. They weren't looking at the jagged, chaotic fractures you'd expect from volcanic rock or a mountain that had folded in on itself over millions of years. Instead, the ground-penetrating radar revealed a series of repeating, angular shapes that defied every local geological rule. Beneath the layers of clay and sediment, the team identified a massive, localized grid, a skeleton of sorts that seemed to provide a structural foundation for the entire boat-shaped mound. This wasn't just a few stray rocks caught in a mudflow, it was a layout of intentional, perpendicular geometry that appeared too organized to be an accident of nature. The most shocking revelation was the detection of a long, central longitudinal line that runs nearly the entire length of the formation, intersected by dozens of vertical beams. In engineering terms, this looks remarkably like a keel and rib system used in maritime construction. But the radar didn't stop at the ribs. As the team refined the depth slices, they discovered what they've labeled as the unexpected find, a clear, 13-foot-wide void or passageway that extends deep into the interior of the structure. This subterranean corridor sits approximately 15 feet below the surface and remains remarkably straight for over 100 feet. Nature can create caves and it can create fissures, but it rarely creates a perfectly straight, uniform tunnel surrounded by right-angled walls that maintain their structural integrity under the weight of a mountain. What makes these findings so compelling is the symmetry. In a natural landslide or a syncline, a downward fold in rock layers, you expect to see warping, twisting, and asymmetrical debris. However, the scans at Durupinar show that the internal structures on the port side of the formation almost perfectly mirror those on the starboard side. The radar pulses bounced off surfaces that are suspiciously flat, suggesting the presence of large, flat panels or bulkheads, rather than rounded river stones or jagged volcanic basalt. The team also identified several enclosures or room-like compartments. These aren't just empty spaces. The radar reflections indicate that the walls of these rooms are made of a material much denser than the surrounding Earth, creating a sharp contrast on the digital readout that looks exactly like a blueprint for a massive, multi-story vessel. If you were to take a modern cargo ship and bury it under 30 feet of wet concrete, then wait a few thousand years for it to petrify, the resulting radar image would look almost identical to what the team is seeing today. The precision of the 90-degree angles is perhaps the most difficult thing for traditional geologists to explain away. There is a specific section near what would be the bow of the structure where the radar shows a series of tiered, stepped levels, suggesting an internal staircase or a ramp system. The geometry is so precise that it has forced even the most skeptical members of the survey team to admit that the subsurface of Durupinar isn't just a pile of dirt, it's an organized arrangement of mass and void. If this is truly a structure, what exactly is it made of? The team had to look beyond the shapes and start testing the very molecules of the soil. Chemical fingerprints. The geometric shapes on the radar screen were enough to make anyone's heart race. But in the world of hard science, pictures are only half the story. You can find a cloud that looks like a castle, but that doesn't mean you can live in it. To prove this wasn't a geological mirage, the research team knew they had to dig into the chemistry. Currently, they performed a series of deep-core soil samples, pulling vertical cylinders of earth from both inside the formation and from the surrounding mountain slopes. When the lab results came back, the data didn't just suggest a difference, it screamed it. The soil inside the boat-shaped mound wasn't just dirt, it was a chemical graveyard. The first major anomaly was the organic carbon content. In the surrounding Turkish hillside, organic matter is relatively sparse, consistent with the high-altitude, rocky terrain. However, the samples taken from within the hull of the site showed levels of organic matter nearly 3 times higher than the surrounding area. Even more striking was the presence of highly concentrated humic acids. These are the chemical remnants of decomposed organic life, often found where massive amounts of wood or vegetation have broken down over millennia. It's as if the radar found the skeleton of the ship and the soil analysis found its flesh. If this were just a natural hill, the chemical makeup should be uniform with the rest of the ridge. Instead, we have a localized pocket of organic decay that sits exactly within the lines of the geometric scan. Then there was the potassium. The lab report revealed that the interior of the site contained potassium levels 40% higher than the external soil. In archaeological contexts, high concentrations of potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen are often anthrosols, soil that has been chemically altered by a long-term human or animal habitation. It's the kind of chemical signature you find in ancient stables or living quarters. When you combine this with the discovery of trace amounts of manganese and iron that appear in thin, sheet-like layers, a picture begins to emerge. These aren't just rocks, they are the petrified remains of something that was once alive and functional. One of the most debated findings involved the metal signatures. Critics often point out that iron is common in volcanic soil, but the analysis noted that the iron at Durupinar wasn't scattered randomly. It appeared in concentrated clusters at the intersections of the ribs identified by the radar. This suggests that rather than being part of the natural rock, these metal elements were perhaps fasteners or reinforcements that have since leached into the surrounding clay. It's a chemical fingerprint that points to intentional construction rather than a volcanic accident. The Earth here isn't just holding a shape, it's holding a memory of a massive biological and structural event. But while the chemistry tells us what the object is made of, it's the layout of the interior that tells us what it was actually used for. How do these chemical layers align with the ancient descriptions of the world's most famous vessel? The 3 decks. Once the chemistry confirmed that the site was a massive pocket of organic decay, the researchers turned their attention back to the architectural layout revealed by the deep tissue radar. In the ancient texts, the blueprint for the Ark is famously specific. It was to be built with 3 distinct decks, a lower, middle, and upper story. For decades, skeptics argued that a natural mudflow would be a solid, compressed mass of Earth. But the 2026 GPR data showed something that made the hair on the researchers' necks stand up. The vertical cross-sections of the formation revealed 3 clear, horizontal divisions, separated by layers of high-density material that appear to be the remnants of floor structures. These aren't just faint lines, they are distinct subterranean horizons. The radar shows that each level has its own unique internal density, with the middle deck containing the highest concentration of those rectangular, room-like voids we discussed earlier. It is as if the weight of the mountain has flattened the vessel over thousands of years, but the internal floors acted as spaces, preserving the structural memory of the three tiers. When the team measured the total length of these decks, they found another coincidence that is hard to ignore. The formation measures exactly 515 feet. If you translate that into the Royal Egyptian cubit, the unit of measurement likely used by an ancient builder of that era, it comes out to exactly 300 cubits. This is the precise length described in the oldest manuscripts of the flood story. The three-deck signatures are particularly prominent in the center of the structure, where the hull is at its deepest. In this section, the radar detected what appear to be vertical shafts or pillars that connect the three levels. In any other archaeological site, these would be identified as support columns. Here, they seem to be the very things holding the rooms open, despite the immense pressure of the earth above. It's a level of structural complexity that completely contradicts the idea of a simple geological fold. A mountain doesn't naturally grow floors, and a landslide doesn't sort itself into three perfectly measured stories. Even the spacing between these decks is consistent. The radar indicates a height of about 15 feet for each level, creating a total internal height that matches the ancient descriptions of a 30-cubit-high vessel. It is a digital ghost of a blueprint that is thousands of years old, rendered in 3D by modern physics. The team isn't just looking at a boat-shaped object anymore. They are looking at a three-story complex that mirrors the most famous ship in human history with mathematical precision. But as compelling as these blueprints are, there is still a massive wall of scientific skepticism to climb. Could nature, through some bizarre and perfect sequence of events, have accidentally mimicked the work of a master builder, nature's architect? Now, if we're going to be honest explorers, we have to look at the other side of the coin. Not everyone is ready to start printing boarding passes for the Ark just yet. There is a group of geologists who look at the exact same radar data and see something else entirely: a syncline. In the simplest terms, a syncline is a fold in the Earth's crust where the rock layers have been squeezed into a U-shape by tectonic pressure. They argue that the walls are just the hard edges of basalt layers, and the decks are simply natural sedimentary bedding that has been compressed over millions of years. To them, the Durupinar site isn't a ship, it's just a mountain with a very convincing sense of style. It's a fair point. Nature is a weird architect. We've seen rocks that look like faces on Mars and clouds that look like animals. So why couldn't a mudflow look like a boat? These skeptics point to the surrounding Akyala Formation, noting that the entire region is a chaotic mess of volcanic activity and landslides. They suggest that as the mud slid down the mountainside, it hit a limestone plug, forcing the debris to flow around it in a streamlined shape. To the skeptical eye, the parallel lines and 90-degree angles are just jointing patterns, a natural phenomenon where rock shears in straight lines when put under extreme stress. But here is where the conversational "wait a minute" happens. While nature can certainly create straight lines, it rarely creates them in a mirrored, symmetrical grid that spans 500 feet. It's one thing for a rock to crack in a straight line. It's another thing for those cracks to form a three-story internal skeleton with a central keel and organic-rich soil only on the inside. The geologists who support the natural theory have to explain away a lot of coincidences. They have to explain why the length is exactly 300 cubits, why there are rooms at regular intervals, and why the chemistry of the soil inside the shape is fundamentally different from the soil 10 feet outside of it. The debate usually ends in a stalemate. Is it a perfect storm of geology that just happens to look like a ship, or is it a ship that has been slowly reclaimed by the Earth? The skeptics say the burden of proof is on the archaeologists, while the researchers say the data has moved past coincidence. It's a fascinating tug-of-war between the rigid laws of geology and the surprising results of the latest technology. This isn't just about a boat anymore. It's a battle over how we interpret the very ground beneath our feet. Regardless of which side you land on, one thing is certain: the Durupinar site is an anomaly that refuses to be ignored. As we look toward the future, the final question isn't whether it looks like a ship, but how we finally prove what it actually is. Do you think it is actually the ship Noah and his family built? Leave your comments below and subscribe to the channel for more content like this.